This is Up Close. I'm Stephen I. Weiss. Caring for the sick is a core Jewish value going all the way back to the stories of Abraham in the Bible. In this week's episode of Up Close, Letty Cottin Pogrebin discusses her book, How to Be a Friend to a Friend Who's Sick. But first, a specific illness that's hard to see is mental illness. Large portions of American society are living with mental disorders like depression and anxiety. For a man at one of the more prominent posts in the world of journalism, his anxiety has long been a secret. But in his new book, My Age of Anxiety, the Atlantic editor Scott Stossel reveals what anxiety has wrought in his life. Here's my interview with Scott Stossel. You're editor of the Atlantic. You've got a job that probably well more than half the journalism industry would trade with you in a second. You've got a wife and 2 children. You live in Washington, D.C. You've had a very successful life. But what you reveal in this book is that all the time you were developing this life, you were beset by, seems like, a crippling anxiety.
Yeah, I mean, I got very good at, and this is true of many people who have certain types of anxiety disorders, but I was very good at hiding it. And I hadn't realized how good I was at hiding it until I actually came out with the book because, I was, my friends and my very close friends and my family and various therapists knew about this. And I always assumed that I had betrayed some evidence of my anxiety to my colleagues. But while they thought I was sort of eccentric and weird, I was eccentric and weird in a way different from the way that they thought I was.
It's interesting to see someone, again, from a prestigious place who hasn't revealed anything about himself, to put out a book out there where he repeatedly refers to himself as having mental illness.
Yep.
I wonder what has that meant for you?
Good question, and a couple of thoughts. I mean, I guess for starters, like I was profoundly ambivalent, and I talk about this in the book, about whether, after all these years of successfully hiding it, now at age 44, what are the consequences of my, as it were, coming out as anxious? I can't put that back in the bottle now and say, oh, I was just kidding.
It's a whole book.
Yeah.
It's not,
well, actually, my son, who's 7, one time said, my daughter had given me this little worry doll that was supposed to, cure me of my anxieties. And my son said, well, what if it works and you're not anxious anymore, and you're going to have to go into the bookstore and tell them to take it away because it's wrong? But
those are good problems.
Yeah, that would be a good problem to have. So I did worry about, would this somehow compromise my ability to do my job? Honestly, I think if I didn't have, and in the book, I sort of recount my conversations that I had with my therapist, Dr. W, about, gee, should I really do this, And he said, no, doing this will, on the one hand, do something very useful, which is so much, and this is a common phenomenon that he talks about called impression management. And people who have various forms of mental illness, particularly anxiety, engage in what they call impression management, which is trying to, one of the things you fear most is having your anxiety and vulnerability exposed. So you build this whole sort of house of cards, veneer of outward competence and confidence that's meant to hide the internal anxiety. So this impression management is both kind of a symptom of the anxiety, but it's also a cause, because it's very exhausting, because you're always afraid that the house of cards will come tumbling down. So one effect, I suppose, of coming out as anxious is that I've already done what my worst case fear was, which was to say, I'm anxious. So if suddenly I were to appear to be anxious, well, it shouldn't surprise anyone. I've already admitted that. It actually probably has reduced my level of anxiety.
And now, on how to be there for those with all kinds of sickness, Letty Cottin Pogrebin. How do you be a friend to a friend who's sick?
Mostly by getting rid of the old etiquette and taking on an etiquette of honesty. I always say, if people could immediately, upon hearing a friend's diagnosis, if I could say to you, tell me what's helpful and what's not, tell me when you want to be alone and when you want company, and tell me what to bring and when to leave. And if you could answer those questions honestly, then you'll be getting from me exactly what you need. Instead of me sending yet another bouquet of flowers, a bunch of balloons that don't fit in the hospital room, or one of those ridiculous baskets covered with orange cellophane that have hard pears in them that no one can buy, least of all a patient. So that will really establish a kind of policy of honesty that allows you to be a much better friend.
And this whole book starts from building with your own experience that you've gone through recently. You had a diagnosis of breast cancer and dealing with that and the treatments with that.
Exactly. Yes, and that's when I noticed that my friends were ill at ease around illness. And I don't blame anyone. Everyone means well, and nobody really knows what to say or do. Because in our culture, somehow or other, this and death you don't talk about.
So what are some of the worst things that you've heard in putting together this book, speaking to friends?
I spoke not just to friends, and I didn't just draw on my own experience through the breast cancer ordeal. I interviewed 80 people. I interviewed people in the Memorial Sloan Kettering waiting room and anyone who happened to have the misfortune to sit next to me on an airplane. I said, I'm writing a book about friendship and illness, and I'd like to know what was helpful, what wasn't. What did your friends do that were appalling acts of misjudgment? The things I heard, for example, a man who came out of prostate cancer surgery. His friend kindly visited him in the hospital. You know, he's a little bleary from the anesthetic, and the friend said, how did it go? And the patient said, great, they got it all, you know, completely bleary. And the friend said, oh yeah, how do they know? Now, that sentence so eroded the man's confidence in the fact that his doctors said we got it all. And about a month later, because this was a best friend and he felt entitled to kind of remonstrate him, he said, do you realize what that sounded like when you said, how do they know? And the friend said, oh, I didn't mean anything by that. I really want to know how they know. He took a scientific interest in how cancer doctors, cancer surgeons know they've got it all. And what it sounded like to the patient was, you think you're living? Think again.
Yeah, and that almost touches on a kind of a classic Jewish stereotype of kind of being far too curious to kill too many cats. Yeah. The idea of just kind of poking at the narrative.
Caring deeply is a good stereotype. I interpret all those questions and hovering that is part of that Jewish stereotype as a real investment in your well-being. We overdo it, but it comes from a really good place. And the balance is difficult. The balance between that kind of solicitousness that suffocates or that makes you feel doomed, that you're being taken care of much too assiduously to the point where you feel, am I really getting better, or is this like a last blast before the axe, you know? And you want to find that balance that allows people to feel cared for without being smothered.
That's all for this week's abbreviated web episode of Up Close. A reminder, you can see the full episode of Up Close on the Jewish channel on cable, or listen to the full audio of the show as a podcast, available on iTunes and your favorite podcast player. Jewish channel is available on cable, Time Warner Cable Channel 528, IO Optimum Channel 505, RCN Channel 268, Bright House Channel 330, Verizon Fios Channel 900, Cox Cable Channel 1, Frontier Communications, and on Comcast in the on-demand menu under premium channels. For more information, visit tjctv.com.